Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a time when keeping a home running wasn't simply another part of the day, it was the day. Our destination is a quiet American suburb in the mid-1950s, where a family's comfort depended on countless invisible tasks performed from sunrise until long after dark. If you enjoy relaxing history journeys like this one, consider subscribing. And if today's topic came from one of your suggestions, thank you for helping shape these stories. Before we begin, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. It's always wonderful to see how many people from around the world settle in for these late-night history adventures. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, let a fan hum softly if you like a little background noise, and imagine yourself stepping into a neighborhood where television is still a luxury for many families, convenience foods are rare, and every ordinary day is filled with extraordinary effort. The year is 1954. The streets are silent. Rows of nearly identical houses rest beneath a fading night sky. Porch lights glow softly, and the only movement comes from a newspaper delivery making its slow journey through the neighborhood. Inside one modest home, the clock quietly reads 5:20 in the morning. There is no alarm. There doesn't need to be. After years of following the same routine, your body has learned exactly when the day begins. You open your eyes while the rest of the house remains asleep. For a few precious moments, the world is perfectly still. Those moments won't last. Carefully, you slip out of bed, making sure not to disturb your husband, whose workday begins later. You pull on a simple cotton house dress chosen for practicality rather than fashion. Before sunset it will likely collect flour, soap, dust, and perhaps a few drops of cooking grease. That is simply part of its job. The hallway is cool beneath your feet as you make your way toward the kitchen. Yesterday's dishes have already been washed and put away. The table is neat. The counters are clear. To anyone walking in later, the room will look effortlessly tidy. Only you know how much effort it took to leave it that way before going to bed. You strike a match. The gas burner comes to life with a quiet blue flame. Soon a kettle begins warming while coffee is prepared. The familiar sounds of another morning slowly fill the room. Today's breakfast will seem ordinary once it reaches the table. Eggs. Toast. Coffee. Perhaps fruit if the week's shopping has stretched far enough. Yet every plate depends on timing. While one pan heats, another must be watched. Bread can brown too quickly. Coffee can become bitter if forgotten. Every minute asks for attention. Outside, the first hints of daylight appear beyond the kitchen window. Soon the children will wake. School clothes will need pressing. Lunches must be packed. Beds made. Floors swept. Shopping planned. Dinner already waiting somewhere in the back of your mind before breakfast has even been served. The remarkable thing isn't one busy morning. It's that this morning will be followed by another tomorrow. And another after that. For millions of homemakers across America, this wasn't an unusual Tuesday. It was simply life. As the coffee finishes brewing and the first footsteps echo from upstairs, the quiet part of the day comes to an end. The house is waking up. And the busiest hours have only just begun. The coffee is ready before anyone else is. Its rich aroma slowly fills the kitchen, mixing with the cool morning air drifting through the slightly opened window. Outside, the neighborhood is beginning to wake. A dog barks somewhere down the street. A car engine turns over in the distance. The sun is still hiding below the horizon, but the day has already started inside this house. You pour hot water into a mixing bowl and gather the ingredients for breakfast. Nothing comes from a frozen package. Nothing can be prepared with the push of a button. Every meal begins with your own hands. Eggs wait in a wire basket on the counter. Bread sits inside a metal bread box. Butter, kept cold in the refrigerator, is firm enough to resist the knife. Even making toast requires attention. Leave it too long, and breakfast begins with smoke instead of conversation. A cast-iron skillet warms slowly over the flame. It has cooked thousands of meals before this one. Its surface carries years of careful seasoning, built one breakfast at a time. Soon strips of bacon begin to sizzle. The sound is familiar enough to become part of the house itself. Tiny drops of grease jump from the pan, reminding you to keep a respectful distance. It's a lesson learned long ago. While the bacon cooks, another task quietly begins. Lunch. Before anyone leaves the house, sandwiches must be prepared, fruits selected, and leftovers carefully wrapped. A factory worker, an office clerk, or a schoolchild cannot simply stop somewhere for lunch every day. Planning ahead saves both money and time. The coffee pot bubbles steadily behind you. You glance toward the clock. Every minute matters. Breakfast isn't only about feeding hungry people. It is about timing. Eggs should reach the table warm. Toast should still be crisp. Coffee should be hot enough to enjoy but not so hot that everyone must wait. It feels less like cooking and more like conducting a small orchestra where every instrument has its own schedule. Footsteps echo upstairs. Someone is awake. Within minutes the quiet kitchen transforms into the busiest room in the house. Children search for missing socks. Someone asks where their homework went. Another can't find yesterday's sweater. Questions arrive almost as quickly as the people asking them. You answer while flipping bacon. You answer while pouring coffee. You answer while packing lunches. No one calls this multitasking. It is simply expected. Soon everyone gathers around the table. The meal lasts only a few minutes. For you, preparing it took nearly an hour. Conversations drift between school assignments, work schedules, weekend plans, and reminders not to forget coats if the weather changes. Then, almost as quickly as they arrived, everyone begins leaving again. Lunch boxes are picked up. Jackets disappear through the front door. The family car backs slowly out of the driveway. The neighborhood grows quiet once more. You stand in the doorway for a moment, waving goodbye until the car disappears around the corner. For just a second. The house is silent again. Then you turn back toward the kitchen. Breakfast may be over. But breakfast has left behind its own trail of work. Dirty plates wait inside the sink. The frying pan still needs scrubbing. Crumbs scatter across the table. Coffee cups remain half full. And beyond the kitchen, the rest of the house patiently waits for its turn. The morning isn't ending. In many ways. It's only beginning. The front door closes. The sound of the family leaving lingers for only a moment before the house settles into an entirely different kind of quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a finished day. The working quiet. You look around the kitchen. Less than an hour ago it was full of conversation, footsteps, clinking dishes, and the smell of breakfast. Now it looks as though a small storm has passed through. Plates are stacked beside the sink. Coffee cups wait on the table. Crumbs have found their way into places that seem almost impossible. The frying pan is still warm enough to remind you that it isn't ready to be forgotten. No one left the room intending to create more work. That's simply what living looks like. You roll up your sleeves. The first task is washing dishes. In the middle of the 1950s, many American families still washed everything by hand. Every plate, every fork, every glass passed through warm water, soap, and careful hands before being dried and returned to its place. The sink slowly fills with steaming water. Soap bubbles rise to the surface. The plates disappear beneath them one by one. It is repetitive work. Wash. Rinse. Dry. Put away. Repeat. By the 20th plate, your hands move almost automatically. You don't count the motions anymore. You simply continue until the sink is empty. The dish towel grows damp. The kitchen window begins to fog slightly from the warm water. Outside, sunlight finally reaches the front lawns. Neighbors begin opening windows. A lawn mower starts somewhere down the block. The neighborhood has officially awakened. When the last dish is placed back inside the cupboard, you don't admire your work for long. There isn't time. The table still needs wiping. The chairs must be pushed back into place. Crumbs are brushed into your hand before they can find their way across the floor. Then comes the floor itself. A broom leans quietly in the corner. Unlike modern vacuum cleaners that glide across smooth floors with little effort, sweeping requires patience. Every corner hides dust. Every chair leg seems determined to trap crumbs. You move carefully around the room, gathering everything into a small pile before carrying it outside. Only then does the kitchen begin to resemble the peaceful room it appeared to be before breakfast. Of course, appearances can be misleading. A clean kitchen is not the end of the work. It is simply the starting point for lunch. The clock hasn't even reached 9 in the morning. Already, your thoughts drift toward the evening meal. What needs thawing? How many potatoes remain? Is there enough flour for tomorrow's baking? Should vegetables be bought today or will they last another day? Running a household means thinking several meals ahead. Long before the family asks, "What's for dinner?" you've already been answering that question for hours. You open the pantry. Glass jars line the shelves. Flour. Sugar. Rice. Beans. Each one tells you something about the week ahead. A half-empty jar means another item for the shopping list. A nearly full bag of flour means bread can wait another day. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. Every purchase has been carefully planned. Every ingredient has a purpose. You pick up the overflowing laundry basket with both hands. It's heavier than it looked from across the room. A week's worth of shirts, dresses, towels, children's clothes, socks, aprons, and bed linens has a surprising amount of weight. Every piece tells the story of yesterday. A grass stain from an afternoon in the yard. A grease spot from breakfast. Dust around the cuffs of a work shirt. Tiny fingerprints across a child's sweater. Before anything can be washed, everything must be sorted. White fabrics in one pile. Colored clothing in another. Heavy towels and bed sheets in their own stack. Delicate items are separated to be washed more carefully. It isn't exciting work. But doing it well means clothes last longer, colors stay brighter, and nothing accidentally turns pink because a single red sock found its way into the wrong pile. The washing machine, if your home is fortunate enough to have one, is helpful, but it isn't magical. It doesn't measure detergent. It doesn't sort clothes. It doesn't move wet laundry into the rinse cycle. And it certainly doesn't fold anything when it's finished. Every load still demands your attention from beginning to end. You fill the machine. Water rushes inside with a steady roar. Soap dissolves into thick white foam. The agitator begins its slow rhythm, twisting the clothing back and forth as if it has all the time in the world. While the machine works, you don't get a break. You make beds. You dust the living room. You straighten books that somehow drift out of place every single day. A quick glance at the clock reminds you that morning is disappearing faster than expected. Soon the washer falls silent. Now comes the heavier part. Wet laundry weighs considerably more than dry laundry. One shirt isn't difficult. 50 shirts, towels, and bed sheets are another matter entirely. You lift each piece into a large laundry basket and carry it outside. The backyard greets you with warm sunshine and a gentle breeze. A long clothesline stretches between two sturdy posts. Wooden clothespins hang neatly from a small canvas bag clipped to the line. One by one, each piece is shaken out before being pinned in place. White sheets billow gently like sails on a quiet sea. Children's shirts flutter beside work trousers. Aprons dance in the breeze. The line slowly fills until almost every inch is occupied. Now nature takes over. The sun provides the heat. The wind finishes the job. Hours later, you'll return to collect everything before evening dew settles across the fabric. Even then, the work won't be finished. Every towel must be folded. Every shirt inspected. Many garments will need ironing before anyone wears them again. Laundry isn't one chore. It's a chain of chores connected together from morning until late afternoon. As you step back to admire the line of freshly washed clothes, another thought quietly enters your mind. Dinner. The ingredients still need preparing. The vegetables still need cleaning. The meat must be checked. The bread box is looking emptier than it did yesterday. You smile to yourself. There is always another task waiting. Not because anyone planned it that way. Simply because a home is never completely finished. It breathes. It changes. It creates new work every single day. You dust off your hands, take one last look at the clothes gently swaying beneath the bright blue sky, and walk back toward the kitchen. Inside, the clock continues its steady march toward noon. Half the day has already passed. Somehow, the busiest hours are still ahead. By the time the laundry is fluttering on the clothesline, the kitchen clock is creeping toward late morning. You glance at the pantry again. There isn't much left. The flour tin feels lighter than it did last week. Only a few potatoes remain in the basket beneath the counter. The butter will last another day if you're careful. The sugar is running low, and the coffee can is nearly empty. Today isn't the day you wanted to shop. It's the day you have to. You reach for a handwritten shopping list kept in a kitchen drawer. There's no app to remind you what you've forgotten. No online order waiting to be delivered. If you forget the baking powder today, you'll discover the mistake tomorrow when you're halfway through mixing bread. Every item matters. You put on a light cardigan, pick up a woven market basket, and step outside. The neighborhood is alive now. Children ride bicycles along the sidewalk. A mail carrier moves from house to house. Somewhere nearby, the steady hum of a lawn mower cuts through the warm air. Mrs. Carter from across the street waves as she waters her flowers. You stop for a minute to exchange a few words. Conversations like these are part of everyday life. News travels quickly in neighborhoods where people actually know one another. Someone's son has started a new job. A family down the street is expecting another baby. A new grocery store is opening 2 towns over. 5 minutes pass before you continue walking. The market isn't around the corner. It's nearly a mile away. That doesn't sound far until you remember you'll be carrying everything home. The sidewalks are warm beneath your shoes as you make your way through the neighborhood. You pass rows of tidy homes, each with carefully trimmed hedges and freshly cut lawns. From open windows drift the familiar sounds of daytime life. A radio playing softly. A baby crying. A vacuum cleaner running. The clatter of dishes being washed. Every house has its own rhythm. Yet somehow, they all sound remarkably similar. The grocery store finally comes into view. Inside, the air is cooler. Metal shopping carts rattle across the tiled floor. Glass bottles of milk stand neatly arranged in refrigerated cases. Fresh fruit is stacked into perfect pyramids. Nothing is prepackaged the way many supermarkets are today. Vegetables are selected one by one. Apples are inspected individually. The butcher stands behind a long glass counter, trimming cuts of meat to order. You wait patiently until it's your turn. About 2 pounds, please. The butcher wraps the meat carefully in thick brown paper before tying it neatly with string. Next comes the produce section. Potatoes. Carrots. Onions. Celery. Everything must last several days. You choose carefully. Bruised vegetables won't survive the week. Neither will fruit that's already too ripe. Soon your basket begins to feel noticeably heavier. Coffee, flour, sugar, butter, eggs, canned vegetables for emergencies. Each purchase represents another meal waiting to be prepared. When the cashier announces the total, you mentally compare it to the week's budget. Every coin matters. Every decision matters. With your purchases packed neatly into paper bags, you begin the journey home. The bags pull against your arms. You shift their weight every few minutes, giving your fingers a brief rest before continuing. By the time your house comes back into view, your shoulders remind you exactly how far you've walked. You unlock the front door and carry the grocery straight into the kitchen. Nothing goes into the cupboards immediately. Fresh vegetables must be cleaned. Meat belongs in the refrigerator. Glass bottles are returned to their proper places. Paper bags are folded flat to be reused another day. Even shopping isn't a single task. It's dozens of small jobs stitched together into one long morning. You finally sit down for the first time since sunrise. Only for a moment. The clock on the wall has quietly slipped past noon. Lunch still needs preparing. And somewhere in the backyard, the laundry is almost dry. The kitchen clock quietly strikes noon. For a brief moment, you think about sitting down with a cup of coffee. Then you remember the laundry hanging outside, the groceries still waiting to be put away, and the simple fact that lunchtime has arrived. Morning has disappeared. Afternoon is already asking for your attention. Lunch is much smaller than breakfast, but it still doesn't prepare itself. Perhaps it's yesterday's leftover soup warmed slowly on the stove. Maybe it's a simple sandwich with sliced tomatoes from the garden and a piece of fruit. Whatever the menu, every plate still needs preparing, serving, and cleaning afterward. Even the quickest meal creates another stack of dishes in the sink. You wash them immediately. Leaving them for later only guarantees a larger job this evening. By now, the sun sits high over the neighborhood. The backyard is bright enough that the white sheets hanging on the clothesline almost seem to glow. You step outside carrying an empty laundry basket. A warm breeze has done its work. The towels are crisp. The shirts are dry. The bed linens smell like sunshine and fresh air. One by one, you remove each clothespin and fold the clothing neatly over your arm. It's a satisfying moment. Not because the work is finished. Because one part of it is. Inside the house, another chore is already waiting. Ironing. You unfold the ironing board and place it near a window where the afternoon light is strongest. The heavy iron warms slowly. Unlike modern steam irons, this one demands patience. Too cool, and wrinkles remain. Too hot, and delicate fabric can scorch in seconds. You sprinkle a little water over stubborn creases before pressing the iron carefully across each shirt. The fabric slowly smooths beneath its weight. Sleeves. Collars. Cuffs. Then the next shirt. And the next. Hours pass one garment at a time. Freshly ironed clothes are folded carefully or hung inside the wardrobe, ready for another week of school, work, and church. No one will notice how much effort went into making them look this neat. That's the strange thing about housework. The better it's done, the less anyone thinks about it. A freshly ironed shirt doesn't announce itself. A neatly folded towel doesn't ask for applause. The reward is simply that everything works the way it's supposed to. By mid-afternoon, sunlight begins to soften. Children's voices echo faintly from somewhere down the street. School will soon be over. That means another shift of the day is about to begin. Before they return, you straighten the living room. Cushions are fluffed. Curtains are adjusted. A quick sweep removes the dust tracked in from the morning. The house begins to look peaceful again. It almost hides the many hours of work that created it. You glance at the clock. Only a little time remains before everyone comes home. Dinner hasn't even started. The vegetables still need peeling. The meat still needs seasoning. The table hasn't been set. Morning belonged to breakfast. Afternoon belonged to laundry. Now evening belongs to the meal that will bring everyone back together. You take a slow breath, tie your apron once again, and walk toward the kitchen. The busiest part of the day is still waiting. The afternoon slips quietly toward evening. Outside, long shadows begin stretching across the front lawns, and the neighborhood takes on a different rhythm. School buses appear on nearby streets. Children race home with backpacks swinging behind them. Somewhere in the distance, a screen door slams, followed by the sound of laughter. Inside the kitchen, another chapter of the day is already underway. Dinner doesn't begin when the family sits down. It begins hours earlier. You untie the paper wrapped around the meat you bought this morning and place it carefully on a wooden cutting board. Potatoes are washed one by one. Carrots are peeled. Onions are chopped, bringing tears that arrive as faithfully as the vegetables themselves. The oven is lit. The familiar warmth slowly spreads through the room. During the summer months, the kitchen becomes the hottest place in the house. There is no cool air flowing from ceiling vents, no quiet machine lowering the temperature. You simply open a window and hope for a breeze. Sometimes it comes. Sometimes it doesn't. While the main dish cooks, you prepare everything else. A pot of vegetables simmers gently. Bread is sliced. Gravy is stirred slowly to keep it smooth. You move from stove to counter, from counter to sink, and back again so many times that you stop noticing the distance. The clock continues moving. Every few minutes you check the oven. Not because you don't trust it. Because experience has taught you that a few extra minutes can mean the difference between perfectly cooked and hopelessly overdone. Soon the children burst through the front door. The quiet house immediately becomes lively again. Schoolbooks land on the table. Shoes are kicked neatly, or not so neatly, near the entrance. Stories about teachers, playground adventures, spelling tests, and scraped knees begin all at once. You listen while stirring the pot. You answer questions while setting the table. You remind someone to wash their hands before dinner. Life inside the house grows louder with every passing minute. Then, just as the sun begins slipping lower in the sky, you hear a familiar sound. A car pulls into the driveway. Your husband has returned from work. The front door opens. Coat comes off. Hat is placed on its hook. The family is together again. For a few moments, the house feels complete. Dinner is carried carefully to the table. Steam rises from the serving dishes. The smell fills every room. Everyone takes a seat. Before the first bite, there is something almost magical about the scene. Hours of planning. Hours of shopping. Hours of cooking. All come together in this single moment. Conversation replaces silence. Stories replace chores. Laughter replaces the steady sounds of the kitchen. The meal itself may last only 30 minutes. The work behind it has filled nearly the entire day. When the last plate is empty, everyone begins to stand. Children disappear to finish homework or play outside until dusk. Your husband settles into his favorite chair with the evening newspaper. For them, dinner marks the end of the busiest part of the day. For you, it marks the beginning of another round of work. The dishes are waiting. The leftovers need storing. The table must be cleared. The kitchen, which welcomed the morning before sunrise, now asks for one final effort before it can finally rest. Tomorrow morning it will all begin again. But tonight isn't over just yet. Dinner is over. The conversation fades as chairs slide back from the table. One by one, family members drift into the evening. Someone turns on the radio in the living room. A child disappears to finish homework. Another heads outside to catch the last few minutes of daylight with friends. The kitchen, however, is far from finished. You gather the plates first. Then the glasses. Knives, forks, serving bowls, and the roasting pan follow close behind. Within a few minutes, the sink is full again. It seems almost impossible. You spent part of the morning washing dishes, and somehow another mountain has appeared. The hot water runs. Soap bubbles rise. The familiar rhythm returns. Wash. Rinse. Dry. Put away. There is something almost meditative about the routine. Not because it is easy. Because you know every movement by heart. By now, the daylight outside has begun to disappear. The kitchen window reflects the room instead of the backyard. The house feels smaller after sunset, warmer somehow, wrapped in the quiet comfort of another ordinary evening. Once the dishes are finished, leftovers are carefully stored. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. Tomorrow's lunch might depend on what remains from tonight's dinner. A slice of roast. A spoonful of vegetables. Perhaps enough potatoes to become tomorrow's breakfast. Every meal quietly helps create the next one. The table is wiped clean. Crumbs disappear into the dustpan. Chairs are pushed neatly back into place. By the time you're finished, there is little evidence that dinner ever happened. That is the curious nature of housework. Success often means erasing every sign that work took place at all. The family notices a clean kitchen. Few stop to imagine how many separate tasks created it. With the kitchen finally in order, you walk through the rest of the house. A jacket is folded over the back of a chair. It belongs in the hallway. A toy train waits beneath the sofa. Back into its box it goes. A blanket is folded. A cushion is straightened. Windows are checked before the curtains are drawn for the night. Each task takes less than a minute. Together they quietly fill another half hour. Upstairs, bedtime begins. Children brush their teeth, change into pajamas, and climb beneath heavy blankets. A bedtime story is read. Questions are asked. One child wants another drink of water. Another insists they aren't tired. Eventually the house grows still once again. The only sounds are the ticking clock in the hallway and the occasional creak of settling floorboards. You finally sit down. For the first time all day, there is nothing demanding your immediate attention. Your hands are tired. Your feet remind you just how many miles they've walked inside this house. The clock reads a little after 9. It has been nearly 16 hours since you first stepped into the kitchen before sunrise. Tomorrow's work has already begun in your mind. Breakfast needs planning. Laundry still needs folding. The shopping list requires another glance. But those tasks can wait until morning. For now, you allow yourself a few quiet minutes. Outside, the neighborhood is dark. Behind hundreds of nearby windows, countless families have ended their day in much the same way. Different homes. Different names. Remarkably similar routines. The lights are switched off one by one. The hallway falls silent. You climb the stairs, knowing that in just a few short hours, another ordinary day will quietly begin all over again. Morning arrives once again. The first rays of sunlight slip through the curtains, and the familiar routine begins almost without thinking. By now, you've learned something important about life inside a 1950s suburban home. The work never truly ends. It simply changes its shape. People often imagine that Sunday was a day of complete rest. For many homemakers, it wasn't. The pace was slower, perhaps. The schedule felt a little different. But the responsibilities never disappeared. Before the family left for church, breakfast still had to be prepared. Clothes needed to be pressed the night before so everyone looked their best. Children's shoes were polished until they reflected the morning light. Buttons were checked. Loose threads were trimmed. Hair was carefully combed into place. Looking presentable wasn't considered a luxury. It was part of showing respect for the occasion. After church came the largest meal of the week. Roasts slowly cooked in the oven. Fresh vegetables simmered on the stove. Desserts prepared the previous day were finally served. Relatives might visit without much notice. Neighbors sometimes stopped by for coffee and conversation. Hospitality wasn't something planned weeks in advance. It was simply expected. That meant the house needed to remain ready for company. The living room stayed tidy. The good tablecloth came out for special meals. The nicest dishes were taken carefully from the cabinet. Even on the quietest day of the week, there was still planning, cooking, serving, cleaning, and washing. Only the rhythm had changed. As evening approached, another tradition quietly unfolded. Preparation for Monday. School clothes were laid out. Work shirts were checked one final time. Lunch ideas were already forming in your mind. The pantry was inspected. Was there enough bread? Enough milk? Enough eggs to last until the next shopping trip? A forgotten ingredient on Sunday often became Monday's first problem. The children slowly drifted toward bedtime. One by one, the lights upstairs went out. The adults enjoyed a few peaceful minutes together before another busy week began. Outside, the neighborhood settled into silence. Inside, tomorrow's responsibilities were already waiting. Looking back today, it's easy to admire the spotless kitchens, perfectly trimmed lawns, and smiling family photographs from the 1950s. Those images tell part of the story. But they rarely show the countless hours of invisible work that made those moments possible. Every clean shirt had been washed, dried, ironed, folded, and put away. Every family dinner represented hours of planning and preparation. Every tidy room reflected someone's time, patience, and determination. The work was ordinary. The commitment was extraordinary. Perhaps that's why these everyday routines deserve to be remembered. Not because they were glamorous. Not because they were easy. But because they quietly held millions of homes together, one breakfast, one load of laundry, one swept floor, and one ordinary day at a time. The house is quiet now. The lights are off. The dishes are dry. The children are asleep. From the outside, it looks as though the day has finally ended. But before we leave this little suburban home behind, there's one last story worth telling. It's the story of the work that almost nobody counted. If someone built a fence, people could point to it and say, "He built that." If someone repaired a car, the finished job sat proudly in the driveway. If someone worked in an office, there was a paycheck at the end of the week that proved the hours had been spent. Housework was different. Its greatest success was that it disappeared. A freshly swept floor looked as though it had always been clean. A neatly folded bed suggested nothing about the person who made it that morning. A warm dinner appeared on the table, and within half an hour it was gone, leaving behind only empty plates and another sink full of dishes. The work erased itself almost as quickly as it was completed. That made it easy to overlook. But it was impossible to live without. Every family depended on someone remembering the little things. To notice that the milk was running low. To replace a missing button before school. To remember a birthday, a doctor's appointment, or the ingredients needed for Sunday's dinner. Most of these jobs lasted only a few minutes. Together, they filled an entire life. The physical work was demanding. The mental work was constant. Long before the phrase, mental load, became common, countless homemakers carried it every single day without having a name for it. They planned tomorrow while finishing today. They solved problems before anyone else noticed they existed. They stretched tight budgets, repaired worn clothing, comforted sick children, welcomed unexpected guests, and somehow still found a way to make an ordinary house feel like home. Not every family looked the same. Not every woman had the same experience. Some loved the rhythm of homemaking. Others dreamed of opportunities beyond it. Many felt both emotions at the same time. History is rarely as simple as a single story. But one thing is difficult to deny. Keeping a household running required skill. It required organization. It required endurance. And above all, it required showing up again tomorrow, ready to repeat tasks that would never truly stay finished. Today, many of those chores have become easier. Dishwashers save hours each week. Washing machines complete loads with little effort. Robotic vacuums quietly clean while people are at work. Groceries can arrive with a few taps on a phone. Technology has changed the way homes operate. Yet every generation still performs its own version of invisible work. Someone remembers birthdays. Someone schedules appointments. Someone notices the refrigerator is almost empty. Someone makes sure there are clean towels in the bathroom before guests arrive. The tools have changed. The responsibility has not disappeared. Perhaps that's the most interesting lesson this ordinary suburban house has to teach us. History isn't only found in famous speeches, great inventions, or dramatic moments that fill textbooks. Sometimes history lives inside a kitchen before sunrise. Sometimes it hangs from a clothesline on a warm afternoon. Sometimes it waits quietly in a handwritten shopping list tucked into a drawer. The smallest routines, repeated day after day, help shape millions of ordinary lives. And those ordinary lives, together, help shape an entire generation. So as we quietly close the front door on this little house and return to the present, perhaps we'll remember that behind every polished photograph from the past was a great deal of unseen effort. Before we say goodbye to our quiet suburban neighborhood, there's one more side of everyday life that deserves a closer look. It wasn't the cooking. It wasn't the cleaning. It wasn't even the endless laundry. It was the collection of small skills that almost every homemaker was expected to know without anyone formally teaching them. A loose button wasn't a reason to buy a new shirt. It was an invitation to find the sewing basket. Inside that basket sat spools of thread in every imaginable shade, a small tomato-shaped pincushion, neatly folded measuring tape, tiny embroidery scissors, and a collection of buttons saved from garments that had long since worn out. Nothing useful was thrown away. A button today might rescue another shirt 6 months from now. A scrap of fabric might become a patch for a child's worn-out knees. Waste was expensive. Ingenuity was free. Many afternoons included a few quiet minutes with a needle and thread. A missing hem was stitched back into place. A torn pocket received another chance. A favorite sweater survived one more winter because someone patiently repaired it instead of replacing it. These repairs rarely attracted attention. Most people never noticed them. That was the goal. A successful repair looked as though nothing had ever happened. The same philosophy reached nearly every corner of the home. Glass jars were washed and reused. Brown paper from the grocery store became shelf liners or wrapping paper. Old towels became cleaning cloths. Soap bars worn down to tiny slivers were pressed together into one usable piece. Even leftover food found a second purpose. Yesterday's roast might become today's sandwiches. Vegetables left from dinner could appear in tomorrow's soup. Bread that had grown too stale for sandwiches often became breadcrumbs or bread pudding. Very little disappeared without first being given another chance. Managing a home meant seeing possibilities where others might see rubbish. That kind of resourcefulness wasn't unusual. It was expected. Children learned these habits simply by watching. They saw clothes being mended instead of discarded. They watched adults carefully save string, containers, and wrapping paper. Without realizing it, they absorbed lessons about patience, thrift, and making the most of what they had. As evening settled once again over the neighborhood, another small ritual quietly unfolded. The kitchen table became tomorrow's planning desk. A pencil. A notepad. A calendar. Perhaps a few grocery coupons clipped from the newspaper. Tomorrow's appointments were reviewed. The shopping list grew by another item or two. A birthday was circled. A reminder was written to send a letter to a relative. None of these jobs took very long. But together they prevented tomorrow from becoming unnecessarily difficult. That invisible planning was one of the greatest talents of homemaking. When everything went smoothly, nobody noticed the preparation behind it. When something was forgotten, everyone noticed. It was an unusual kind of success. The reward for doing it perfectly was that it appeared effortless. As the final light in the kitchen was switched off, tomorrow already existed in careful notes and quiet plans. Morning would arrive soon enough. And when it did, another ordinary day would begin, not with grand celebrations or dramatic events, but with dozens of small acts of care that kept an ordinary family moving forward, one day at a time. For years, mornings in this neighborhood followed a familiar rhythm. The coffee brewed. Breakfast was served. Laundry was washed. Dinner was planned before lunch had even begun. Day after day, season after season, the routine remained almost unchanged. But by the late 1950s and into the 1960s, small changes quietly began arriving at suburban front doors. At first, they didn't seem revolutionary. A new washing machine promised to finish loads a little faster. An improved vacuum cleaner was lighter and easier to push from room to room. Supermarkets grew larger, offering more packaged foods than ever before. Frozen vegetables appeared in grocery freezers. Cake mixes claimed to save precious minutes. Television commercials promised that modern appliances would give families more free time. The advertisements were full of smiling faces. Sparkling kitchens. Perfectly polished floors. Everything looked effortless. Reality, however, was a little more complicated. Saving time on one chore often meant expectations quietly increased somewhere else. If the washing machine worked faster, perhaps laundry could be done more often. If vacuuming became easier, perhaps carpets should look spotless every day. If cooking became quicker, perhaps families expected larger meals or more elaborate desserts. Technology certainly helped. But the list of responsibilities rarely became shorter. Instead, many homemakers found themselves maintaining even higher standards than the generation before them. Beyond the kitchen, another kind of change was unfolding. More women began pursuing college educations. Others entered offices, classrooms, hospitals, and businesses in growing numbers. Conversations about opportunity, independence, and balancing work with family life became increasingly common. For many families, these changes brought exciting new possibilities. For others, they raised difficult questions that previous generations had rarely been asked. Could a woman build a career and raise a family? How should household responsibilities be shared? What did a successful home really look like? There were no simple answers. Every family found its own path. Some embraced change quickly. Others preferred traditions that had served them well for decades. Looking back today, it's easy to imagine history changing all at once. In reality, it usually changes quietly. One new appliance. One new job opportunity. One conversation around the dinner table. One generation teaching the next a slightly different way of living. The suburban homes we've visited throughout this journey didn't disappear overnight. Many still stand today. Their kitchens have been remodeled. Their appliances replaced. Their walls repainted. Yet beneath those updates, the echoes of earlier routines remain. Someone still prepares meals. Someone still folds laundry. Someone still remembers birthdays, grocery lists, and tomorrow's appointments. The tools may have changed. The need to care for a home has not. Perhaps that's why these ordinary stories continue to matter. They remind us that history isn't only shaped by famous leaders or dramatic events. It's also shaped by the quiet determination of millions of people whose names never appeared in newspapers, but whose daily efforts helped build families, neighborhoods, and communities. As evening settles once more over our little suburban street, porch lights flicker on one by one. Children are called inside for dinner. The smell of home-cooked meals drifts through open windows. The neighborhood feels peaceful. Not because life is easy, but because countless acts of ordinary care are happening behind every front door. And tomorrow morning, just as the sun rises over the rooftops, another ordinary day will begin again. As our journey through this quiet suburban neighborhood draws to a close, it's worth pausing for a moment, not to admire the spotless kitchens or the neatly trimmed lawns, but to appreciate the lives that unfolded behind those front doors. History often celebrates extraordinary moments. The first person to walk on the moon. A president giving a famous speech. A scientist making a groundbreaking discovery. Those moments deserve to be remembered. But history is also built from ordinary days. Days that began before sunrise with the sound of a kettle warming on the stove. Days filled with grocery lists, school lunches, mended clothing, and freshly made beds. Days that looked almost identical to the one before them. Those ordinary days shaped childhoods. They created family traditions. They filled photo albums with birthday parties, holiday dinners, and quiet Sunday afternoons. Behind every one of those memories was someone making sure the details came together. A cake didn't simply appear on the table. Someone baked it. A holiday meal didn't prepare itself. Someone spent hours planning it. A child's favorite sweater didn't magically last another winter. Someone repaired it, stitch by stitch. Much of that work went unnoticed because it was expected. The highest compliment was often silence. If everything ran smoothly, no one stopped to ask why. Only when something went wrong did people notice how much effort was required to keep a household running. Perhaps that's why these stories matter today. They remind us that care has value, even when it isn't measured by a paycheck or recognized with awards. They remind us that patience, planning, and consistency are forms of skill. And they remind us that the smallest routines, repeated day after day, can quietly shape generations. Of course, life wasn't perfect. Every family faced its own challenges. Some struggled financially. Some balanced illness, loss, or uncertainty alongside their daily responsibilities. Others dreamed of opportunities that reached beyond the walls of their homes. The past was never as simple as old photographs sometimes make it appear. Like every era, it carried both comfort and hardship. Yet through it all, ordinary people kept moving forward. They adapted. They improvised. They cared for one another in countless small ways that rarely found their way into history books. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson this little suburban street has to offer. Not that life was easier. Not that it was harder. Simply that every generation finds its own way of meeting the responsibilities placed before it. Today, our tools are different. Our schedules are different. Our homes may look different. But the quiet acts of caring for the people we love continue, just as they always have. As the evening settles over the neighborhood one final time, porch lights glow softly against the fading sky. A gentle breeze stirs the trees. The streets grow quiet. Inside each home, another day has come to an end. Tomorrow will bring fresh tasks, new challenges, and another chance to begin again. And somewhere, someone will quietly rise before the rest of the house, make the first cup of coffee, and start another ordinary day that, years from now, will become part of history. Before we leave this quiet neighborhood behind, let's try one final thought experiment. Imagine that tomorrow morning, instead of waking in your own bed, you open your eyes inside this little suburban home. The calendar says 1954. Your phone doesn't exist. There are no text messages waiting. No weather app. No online grocery order arriving at your door. No search engine to answer a question in seconds. The only thing waiting for you is another ordinary day. The clock reads just after 5 in the morning. Outside, the street is still wrapped in darkness. Inside, the house is silent. You already know what comes next. The stove must be lit. Breakfast has to be prepared. Lunches need packing. Beds need making. Laundry needs washing. The floor will somehow collect crumbs before the day is over. Dinner will ask for your attention long before anyone says they're hungry. Somewhere between all those jobs, a child might scrape a knee. A neighbor may stop by unexpectedly. A button could fall off a shirt moments before it's needed. The schedule leaves just enough room for surprises, and somehow expects you to handle them without falling behind. Now imagine repeating that routine. Not for one day. Not for 1 week. But for years. Season after season. Summer heat pouring through open windows while the oven warms the kitchen even more. Winter mornings when cold floors greet your bare feet before sunrise. Spring bringing muddy shoes through the front door. Autumn reminding you that another holiday season is already approaching. The calendar keeps turning. The work keeps returning. Yet within that endless cycle, life quietly unfolds. Children grow taller. School photographs fill family albums. Birthdays come and go. Holiday traditions are passed from one generation to the next. The house changes little by little, carrying the memories of everyone who has laughed, cried, celebrated, and worried within its walls. Years later, those children become adults. They remember the smell of fresh bread cooling on the counter. They remember clean sheets drying in the summer breeze. They remember coming home after school to find dinner already cooking. Many of those memories seem effortless. Only later do they realize someone created them through thousands of ordinary acts of care. Perhaps that's the quiet miracle of a home. Its greatest achievements often go unnoticed while they're happening. Only with time do we understand how much love can be hidden inside everyday routines. As night settles over the neighborhood one final time, the porch lights switch off one by one. The streets fall silent. The kitchen is clean. Tomorrow's clothes are ready. The grocery list waits patiently on the counter. Another ordinary day has come to an end. And another is already waiting just beyond sunrise. Well, here we are. After spending an entire week inside this quiet suburban home, we've reached the end of our journey. Over the past several chapters, we've watched a single ordinary day unfold from before sunrise until long after dark. We've followed the rhythm of breakfasts cooked from scratch, laundry hung beneath an open sky, grocery trips made on foot, dinners planned hours in advance, and evenings spent preparing for tomorrow before today's work had even finished. At first glance, none of it seemed extraordinary. There were no famous speeches. No dramatic headlines. No world-changing inventions. Just ordinary people doing ordinary things. And yet, those ordinary things quietly shaped millions of lives. Every clean school uniform helped a child begin the day with confidence. Every packed lunch fueled another day's work. Every carefully planned family meal became a moment where stories were shared, problems were solved, and memories were made. These weren't just chores. They were the invisible threads holding everyday life together. History often remembers the moments that changed the world in an instant. But most lives aren't lived in dramatic moments. They're built one ordinary day at a time. One breakfast. One conversation. One repaired shirt. One handwritten shopping list. One bedtime story. Those small moments rarely appear in museums. Yet they become the memories families treasure for decades. As we've traveled through the 1950s, we've also been reminded that every generation believes its routines are simply normal. People living then couldn't imagine ordering groceries with a few taps on a screen. Just as we sometimes forget how astonishing our own conveniences would appear to someone from 70 years ago. Every era has its challenges. Every era has its comforts. Every generation solves problems in its own way. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson hidden inside this little suburban house. Technology changes. Fashion changes. Neighborhoods change. But caring for one another never goes out of style. Someone still wakes up early to prepare breakfast. Someone still worries about paying bills, remembering appointments, and making sure there's enough food in the pantry. Someone still notices the little things that keep a household running smoothly. Those quiet acts of care continue, even if they look different today. So, as we gently close the front door of this home and return to the present, I hope you'll carry one thought with you. The next time you walk into a clean kitchen, sleep beneath freshly washed sheets, share a meal with family, or notice one of those everyday comforts that seems to appear without much thought, take a moment to remember that, somewhere, someone invested time, patience, and effort to make that ordinary moment possible. History isn't only found in grand monuments or famous names. Sometimes it lives in the smell of fresh bread. Sometimes it's folded into a stack of clean towels. Sometimes it's waiting quietly in a handwritten recipe passed from one generation to the next. Those stories deserve to be remembered too. If these walls could speak, they probably wouldn't tell stories about extraordinary days. They would tell you about Tuesdays. The kind of Tuesday that looked almost exactly like the one before it. The kind where nothing remarkable happened, yet everything important did. A child learned to tie a shoe. A family shared dinner together. A torn shirt was quietly repaired instead of thrown away. A birthday was marked on a calendar weeks in advance. A favorite recipe was written onto a faded index card with careful handwriting. History often overlooks these moments because they don't seem dramatic. But ordinary life has always been the foundation upon which extraordinary lives are built. Every scientist once sat at a kitchen table doing homework. Every teacher was once a child whose lunch had been packed before school. Every artist, doctor, engineer, mechanic, and musician grew up inside a home where someone made sure there was dinner waiting at the end of the day. The work inside these houses reached much further than their front doors. It shaped futures. Walk through this neighborhood one last time. The sidewalks are cracked in places now. Many of the young trees planted beside these homes have grown tall enough to shade entire streets. Some houses have new owners. Others have been remodeled so completely that only their foundations remain the same. Children who once raced bicycles down these sidewalks are now grandparents themselves. Yet if you look carefully, you can still recognize pieces of the past. A clothesline standing quietly behind an older home. A cast-iron skillet hanging in someone's kitchen. A handwritten recipe tucked inside a cookbook that's been opened thousands of times. These objects survived because they carried memories as well as purpose. Today, we often measure progress by speed. How quickly food can be delivered. How fast laundry can be finished. How many tasks can be completed before sunset. The people we've spent time with this week measured life differently. Not because they wanted to. Because they had to. Their days moved at the pace of rising bread dough, drying laundry, simmering soup, and children growing one season at a time. There is something surprisingly calming about that rhythm. Not because it was easier. It certainly wasn't. But because every task demanded full attention. When you baked bread, you baked bread. When you folded laundry, you folded laundry. When the family gathered around the dinner table, the world beyond the neighborhood could wait a little while. Perhaps that's one lesson worth carrying back to the present. Not to live exactly as people did 70 years ago. But to remember that ordinary moments deserve our attention too. A shared meal. A quiet conversation. The smell of coffee early in the morning. The comforting sound of rain against the kitchen window. These moments rarely make headlines. Yet years later, they often become the memories we treasure most. As the sun slowly disappears behind the rooftops, porch lights begin glowing across the neighborhood once again. Another evening settles over the little suburban street we've come to know so well. Inside every home, another ordinary story is unfolding. Different families. Different generations. The same timeless hope that tomorrow will be a little brighter than today. And with that, we quietly leave this neighborhood behind. The front door closes. The lights fade. The street grows still. Before we leave the 1950s behind completely, let's take one last slow walk through the neighborhood. The evening air has cooled. Porch lights glow softly along the street, and the sounds of the day have faded into the gentle chorus of crickets. A bicycle rests against a white fence. A sprinkler clicks steadily across a front lawn. Somewhere in the distance, a radio plays a familiar tune through an open window. From the sidewalk, every house seems peaceful. Curtains are drawn. Dinner is over. Children are getting ready for bed. It would be easy to think every family lived exactly the same life. But every front door hides a different story. In one home, a young couple is celebrating the arrival of their first baby. A crib has been squeezed into the corner of a small bedroom, and two exhausted parents are discovering that sleep has suddenly become a luxury. Across the street, an elderly widow waters the flowers her husband planted years earlier. She still keeps his favorite chair by the living room window. Nothing has moved since he was there. A few houses farther down, a family is saving every spare dollar in hopes of buying their very first television. Until then, evenings are filled with card games, books, conversations, and neighbors dropping by for coffee. History often speaks about decades as though everyone experienced them the same way. But they never did. Some families had comfortable lives. Others worried constantly about paying bills. Some children grew up surrounded by opportunity. Others faced challenges that rarely appeared in magazine advertisements. The past, like the present, was filled with many different realities. Yet one thing connected nearly every household. Someone cared for it. Someone remembered when the milk was running low. Someone noticed the loose button before school. Someone stayed awake beside a sick child. Someone quietly carried responsibilities that rarely appeared in family photographs. Those quiet acts of care rarely became famous. They weren't meant to. They simply helped another day unfold a little more smoothly. As darkness settles across the neighborhood, the last porch light switches off. The sidewalks become empty. The breeze carries the scent of freshly cut grass and cooling summer air. Tomorrow morning, long before sunrise, the first kitchen lights will appear once again. Coffee will begin brewing. Breakfast will be prepared. Another ordinary day will quietly begin. And somewhere, decades from now, someone may look back on today's ordinary routines with the same curiosity we've brought to this neighborhood tonight. Perhaps that's the wonderful thing about history. It reminds us that today's everyday moments are tomorrow's memories. The neighborhood has finally gone quiet. The last porch light has gone dark. The final car has pulled into its driveway. Even the crickets seem softer now. If you happen to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and walk these empty streets, you might think nothing was happening. But every home was quietly preparing for another day. In one kitchen, a loaf of bread sat beneath a clean towel, slowly rising overnight. In another, tomorrow's lunch ingredients had already been laid out on the counter to save a few precious minutes before sunrise. A school dress hung neatly from the bedroom door. A work shirt waited on its hanger, freshly ironed the evening before. Tomorrow's grocery list rested beside the telephone. Everything had been placed exactly where it needed to be. Not by accident. By intention. The people who kept these homes running understood something that rarely appeared in magazines. A peaceful morning usually began the night before. Every small decision made after dinner was a gift to tomorrow's self. Shoes placed by the front door. Lunchboxes cleaned and left to dry. Coffee measured into the percolator, ready for water before dawn. Coupons tucked neatly into a handbag before shopping day. Tiny preparations. Minutes saved. Stress avoided. No one applauded these habits. Most family members probably never noticed them. That was part of the job. The smoother tomorrow felt, the less visible today's preparation became. There is a curious irony in homemaking. The better you became at it, the easier it looked to everyone else. Guests admired a tidy house without seeing the hours behind it. Children remembered warm meals without remembering the planning. Even husbands returning from work often saw only the finished result. The invisible effort remained invisible. Yet those unseen hours quietly shaped family life. Not through dramatic gestures, but through consistency. Through showing up every single day. Through repeating ordinary tasks with extraordinary patience. That kind of dedication is difficult to measure. It doesn't fit neatly into charts or statistics. But you can often feel its results. In the comfort of a familiar home. In the smell of dinner waiting after a long day. In the confidence of a child who knows someone will always be there when the school bus arrives. Those comforts didn't happen by themselves. Someone built them, one small routine at a time. As the clock moves closer to 3 in the morning, the neighborhood rests peacefully. Only a few kitchen clocks continue ticking in the silence. Within a couple of hours, the first alarm, or perhaps no alarm at all, will signal the beginning of another day. Slippers will touch cold floors. Curtains will be opened. Matches will light gas burners. Coffee will begin its familiar bubbling conversation. And without fanfare, another cycle will begin. Nearly identical to yesterday. Almost certainly similar to tomorrow. Because that was the rhythm of life inside millions of mid-century homes. Not glamorous. Not effortless. But quietly dependable. And perhaps that's why these ordinary days deserve to be remembered. They remind us that history wasn't built only by people who stood on stages or appeared in newspapers. It was also built by people who woke before sunrise, cared for those around them, and asked for very little in return. By now, you probably know this neighborhood as well as the people who lived here. You know which porch catches the first rays of morning sunlight. You know which kitchen window glows before dawn. You can almost hear the soft bubbling of the percolator before anyone has even stepped outside. After spending so much time here, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. For the homemaker, the day never truly had a beginning or an end. It simply flowed from one responsibility into the next. Yesterday's dinner became today's leftovers. Today's leftovers became tomorrow's lunch. Tomorrow's shopping list began while tonight's dishes were still drying. Every task quietly prepared the next one. It was a chain with no obvious starting point. And almost no finish line. There were no weekends from the work. No vacation from keeping a household running. Birthdays still required cooking. Holidays often created even more work than ordinary weekdays. Even illness rarely brought a complete pause. If a mother caught a cold, breakfast still needed making. Laundry still waited. Children still needed care. The house simply adjusted around her until she was able to continue. That quiet resilience rarely appeared in advertisements. Magazine covers showed spotless kitchens and smiling faces. They didn't show aching backs after lifting heavy laundry baskets. They didn't show sore hands after scrubbing pots with steel wool. They didn't show tired feet after walking miles inside the same house before sunset. Real life was less polished. And perhaps more remarkable because of it. Still, there were moments of genuine happiness scattered throughout the routine. Fresh bread coming out of the oven. The laughter of children playing in the backyard. The satisfaction of crossing the final item off a shopping list. The smell of clean sheets drying on a sunny afternoon. The sound of rain tapping gently against the kitchen window while supper simmered on the stove. Those moments were small. But they carried people through the harder days. Looking back now, it would be easy to focus only on the workload. Or only on the nostalgia. Neither tells the whole story. Life was a mixture of both. Hard work and simple joys. Exhaustion and pride. Routine and love. Like every chapter of history, it was beautifully complicated. Perhaps that's why ordinary homes deserve just as much attention as famous landmarks. Within their walls, generations learned kindness, responsibility, patience, and resilience. They celebrated birthdays. They mourned losses. They welcomed newborn babies. They gathered around dinner tables after long days apart. Those moments rarely changed the course of nations. But they changed the course of families. And families, one after another, quietly shaped the future. So as dawn prepares to break over this little suburban street once more, imagine the first light touching the rooftops. A bedroom curtain moves gently in the breeze. A floorboard creaks in the hallway. Someone reaches for a familiar house dress hanging neatly over a chair. Someone else lights the stove. The percolator begins its slow, comforting rhythm. Another ordinary morning has arrived. Not because history demands it. Because life does. We've reached the end of our time in this little suburban neighborhood. For 20 chapters, we've walked through quiet streets, stepped into modest kitchens, listened to bubbling percolators before sunrise, and followed the steady rhythm of lives that rarely found their way into history books. And yet, somehow, they never stopped making history. The people who lived here probably never imagined that decades later, strangers from around the world would be curious about their ordinary Tuesday mornings. They weren't trying to create a legacy. They were simply trying to get through another day. One breakfast at a time. One grocery trip at a time. One load of laundry at a time. That may not sound remarkable. But perhaps that's exactly what makes it remarkable. The greatest achievements aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're repeated so faithfully that we stop noticing them altogether. Think about everything that had to happen inside one ordinary home before the clock struck noon. Beds were made. Breakfast was cooked. Lunches were packed. Children were dressed. Laundry had already begun drying in the backyard. Groceries had been purchased. Floors had been swept. And the evening meal was already being planned. Most of it happened before many people had finished their first cup of coffee. That wasn't unusual. It was simply another weekday. Now imagine multiplying that routine by millions of households across America. Millions of kitchens waking before sunrise. Millions of mothers tying aprons, lighting stoves, folding laundry, and quietly solving problems that no one else ever saw. Not because they expected recognition. Because someone needed to do it. History often celebrates invention. But every invention still depended on someone making breakfast. History remembers leaders. But every leader was once a child who came home to a meal prepared by someone else. History records great moments. Yet those great moments were built upon countless ordinary ones. Perhaps that's why everyday life deserves a place in the story. Not as background. But as the foundation. As we stand outside this little house one last time, evening settles gently across the neighborhood. The breeze moves through the trees exactly as it did 70 years ago. Some of these houses still stand today. Others have changed beyond recognition. Families have come and gone. Children have grown old. The bicycles have disappeared. The clotheslines have mostly vanished. The heavy percolators have been replaced by modern coffee makers. Yet the purpose of a home remains wonderfully familiar. To provide warmth. To offer comfort. To gather the people we love around a table. To create memories so ordinary that we don't realize how precious they are until years later. One day, someone may look back on our own routines with the same curiosity we've shown toward the past. They may wonder how we lived. What filled our kitchens? What sounds greeted us every morning? What simple traditions brought our families together? And perhaps they'll discover the same truth we've discovered here. That history isn't only made in grand halls, busy factories, or famous battlefields. It's made in quiet kitchens before dawn. In handwritten grocery lists. In bedtime stories. In warm meals shared after long days. In the invisible acts of care that hold families together, year after year. So as the final kitchen light switches off and the neighborhood falls peacefully asleep, we quietly close the door on this chapter of history. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the ordinary people whose ordinary days became the foundation of the modern world. If you've made it this far, then you've spent the better part of a week living alongside a family that never knew you were there. You've stood quietly in the corner of their kitchen before dawn. You've walked behind them to the grocery store. You've listened to the steady hum of an ordinary neighborhood as another day unfolded. And now, as we prepare to leave for good, there's one final question worth asking. What became of this house? Not just the building. The people. The children who raced through the backyard with scraped knees and grass stains. The parents who worried about bills, packed lunches, and hoped they were doing enough. Time carried them forward, just as it carries all of us. The children grew older. The bicycles became driver's licenses. School lunches became office briefcases. The little bedroom with toy trains and storybooks eventually held packed suitcases as sons and daughters left to begin lives of their own. The parents grew older too. Their hair slowly turned gray. The routines that once felt endless gradually came to an end. One morning, there were no more school uniforms to iron. No more lunchboxes waiting on the kitchen counter. The house became quieter than it had been in decades. Every family reaches that season eventually. The rooms stay the same size. But somehow they feel much larger. The kitchen that once seemed crowded now has empty chairs around the table. The hallway no longer echoes with running footsteps. The toys are gone. The laughter arrives only during holidays and family visits. Yet the memories never leave. Years later, a grown son might walk back into that kitchen and instantly remember the smell of bacon cooking before school. A daughter might find her mother's old recipe box tucked inside a cabinet, each card covered with handwritten notes and tiny stains from meals prepared long ago. A grandchild might discover an old family photograph and wonder what daily life looked like inside this ordinary little house. Perhaps that's how history survives. Not only through museums or textbooks, but through memories passed from one generation to the next. Through recipes. Through traditions. Through stories told around dinner tables. Long after the people are gone, those little pieces remain. They remind us that a home is never simply wood, brick, and glass. A home is the collection of thousands of ordinary moments shared inside it. Morning conversations over coffee. Birthday candles glowing in the dining room. Quiet evenings spent listening to rain against the windows. Simple moments that seemed unimportant while they were happening. Until one day they became priceless memories. As we take one last look down this peaceful suburban street, the houses stand quietly beneath the evening sky. Some have new paint. Some have larger trees shading their front lawns. Some have welcomed 3 or 4 generations of families since the day they were first built. The neighborhood has changed. The world has changed. But the hope that every family carried into these homes remains beautifully familiar. To build a good life. To care for one another. To leave the next generation a little better prepared than the last. And perhaps that's the quiet message this little house has been waiting to share all along. Ordinary lives matter. Ordinary work matters. Ordinary love matters. Because when enough ordinary days are lived with care, they become an extraordinary legacy. As we stand at the edge of this neighborhood one last time, something becomes wonderfully clear. The people we've spent time with were never trying to make history. They weren't inventors unveiling a groundbreaking machine. They weren't politicians giving speeches from grand stages. They weren't celebrities whose names filled newspaper headlines. They were simply people who woke up every morning and did what needed to be done. And somehow, that was enough. History has a habit of celebrating extraordinary people. But civilizations have always depended on ordinary ones. Every city, every town, every neighborhood has been held together by countless individuals whose names were never written into history books. The woman who remembered every birthday in the family. The father who repaired a broken fence after work. The grandmother who could somehow turn leftovers into another full meal. The neighbor who quietly shoveled someone else's walkway after a snowstorm. These weren't famous accomplishments. They were quiet acts of responsibility. And together, they created something remarkable. Trust. Community. Home. Walk through this suburban street one final time. Look at the mailboxes standing patiently beside each driveway. Notice the curtains gently moving behind the windows. Imagine the countless conversations these houses have heard over the decades. First words spoken by toddlers. Graduation celebrations. Holiday laughter filling dining rooms. Late-night conversations after difficult days. Every home carries stories that outsiders never see. Every family writes its own history behind closed doors. Perhaps that's why old houses feel different. Not because the bricks remember. But because we know people loved, worried, celebrated, and hoped inside them. Those emotions leave an impression that photographs alone can never capture. If you've ever stepped into your grandparents' house and instantly remembered the smell of baking bread, or found an old cookbook covered with handwritten notes, or opened a drawer and discovered letters tied together with ribbon, then you've experienced this quiet kind of history yourself. It's personal. It's ordinary. And it's deeply human. The world has changed dramatically since the 1950s. Homes are larger. Appliances are smarter. Communication happens instantly. Entire grocery stores now fit inside a smartphone screen. Yet despite all of those changes, people still gather around dinner tables. Parents still worry about their children. Families still celebrate birthdays. Friends still stop by unexpectedly. And someone, somewhere, is probably washing dishes while everyone else relaxes in the next room. Some parts of life never really change. Perhaps that's comforting. As evening settles across the neighborhood one final time, the wind gently rustles the trees planted by families who never imagined they'd someday become towering oaks. The sidewalks have weathered decades of footsteps. The front doors have welcomed thousands of ordinary mornings. And through it all, life continued exactly as it always does. One sunrise. One breakfast. One conversation. One ordinary day after another. Maybe that's the greatest lesson this quiet street has offered us. History isn't only something we inherit. It's something we create. Every single day. Through kindness. Through responsibility. Through the countless little moments that seem too ordinary to remember, until years later, when they're the memories we treasure most. So wherever you're listening from tonight, perhaps take a moment to appreciate your own ordinary routines. One day, they'll become someone else's history. And just like this little suburban neighborhood, they'll tell a story worth remembering. It's early morning again. Not because the story has started over. But because this is where it has always belonged. Long before the neighborhood is awake, a single kitchen light flickers on. The house is silent. The air is cool. Outside, the streets are empty except for a newspaper delivery truck making its slow, familiar rounds. Inside, someone reaches for the percolator one more time. Water fills the pot. Coffee grounds are measured with practiced hands. The lid is placed carefully on top. A match strikes. The blue flame appears. A few minutes later, the first gentle bubbles begin their steady rhythm. If you've listened from the very beginning of this journey, that sound should feel familiar now. It greeted us on our very first morning. And somehow, after everything we've seen together, it still feels like home. That little percolator has become more than a coffee pot. It's become the soundtrack of ordinary life. It bubbled through birthdays. Through rainy afternoons. Through rushed school mornings. Through quiet Sunday breakfasts. Through difficult conversations and joyful celebrations alike. It never knew which day would become someone's favorite memory. It simply did its job. Morning after morning. Year after year. Perhaps that's true of the people we've been following too. They couldn't know which ordinary breakfast their children would remember decades later. They couldn't know that a handwritten recipe would someday become a treasured family heirloom. They couldn't know that one simple act of kindness would echo through generations. They simply lived. One day at a time. There's something deeply comforting about that. We spend so much of our lives wondering whether today's work matters. Whether anyone notices. Whether these small routines make any difference at all. History gives us a quiet answer. Yes. They do. Not because every task changes the world. But because every task helps build someone's world. A warm breakfast before school. Fresh sheets after a long day. A clean kitchen waiting for tomorrow morning. These things rarely make headlines. Yet they become the invisible foundation of countless happy memories. As the sun slowly rises above the rooftops, golden light spills across the neighborhood. The dew sparkles on the grass. Birds begin their morning songs. Another ordinary day has arrived. The families inside these homes don't realize they're living through history. Neither do we. Perhaps that's the final lesson this neighborhood leaves behind. History is never only yesterday. It's happening right now. In your own kitchen. On your own street. Around your own dinner table. The ordinary moments you're living today may one day become the stories your children, grandchildren, or even strangers look back on with curiosity and affection. So don't underestimate them. The morning coffee. The family meal. The quiet conversation before bedtime. These are the moments that quietly shape a lifetime. As we place the lid back onto the percolator one final time and gently pull the front door closed behind us, the neighborhood continues exactly as it always has. Peacefully. Steadily. One ordinary morning after another. The years have a curious way of passing. At first, they move so slowly that every season feels like a lifetime. Then, almost without warning, decades have slipped quietly by. The little suburban neighborhood we've been visiting is no longer new. The saplings planted along the sidewalks now stretch high above the rooftops. Their branches cast long afternoon shadows over driveways where children once learned to ride bicycles. The fresh white paint on the fences has softened with age. The sidewalks bear tiny cracks from countless winters and summers. Time has left its signature everywhere. But the neighborhood is still alive. Walk slowly down the street. You might notice an elderly couple sitting together on a front porch. Perhaps they bought this house when it was brand new. Perhaps they carried their first baby through that front door. Perhaps they watched every one of those trees grow taller, year after year. Now they watch grandchildren run across the very same lawns. The neighborhood has become a bridge between generations. Inside one house, an old kitchen timer still hangs beside the stove. It no longer rings every morning, but no one has the heart to throw it away. In another home, a weathered cookbook rests on a shelf. Its pages have yellowed with age. Small stains mark favorite recipes prepared hundreds of times. A handwritten note tucked inside reads, "Add a little more cinnamon." No one remembers exactly when it was written. But everyone follows it anyway. Some traditions survive because they work. Others survive because they remind us of someone we loved. That is how ordinary history quietly passes from one generation to the next. Not through monuments. Through habits. Through recipes. Through familiar sayings repeated around dinner tables. Through tiny gestures so ordinary that we hardly notice them until they disappear. Today's children race through these neighborhoods carrying devices their grandparents could never have imagined. Yet they still come inside when someone calls them for dinner. Families still gather around tables. Birthdays are still celebrated with candles. Holiday meals still fill homes with familiar smells. The details have changed. The heart of family life remains remarkably familiar. Perhaps every generation secretly believes its everyday routines will last forever. They never do. Children grow up. Parents grow older. Neighbors move away. New families arrive with new stories to tell. And the house quietly welcomes them all. It asks for nothing except to be lived in. To hear laughter again. To shelter another family through another ordinary year. As evening settles across the neighborhood once more, porch lights flicker on exactly as they have for decades. Some shine from the original fixtures. Others have been replaced several times. Either way, they still serve the same purpose. To welcome people home. Maybe that's what every home has always tried to do. Not impress the world. Simply welcome people home. As darkness gently covers the quiet street, we pause for one last look. The houses stand peacefully beneath the evening sky. The trees sway softly in the breeze. And somewhere inside one of those kitchens, someone is already thinking about tomorrow's breakfast. Some things, it seems, never really change. And perhaps we're better for that. Imagine walking into this same house, not in 1953. Not in 1963. But today. The front door still opens with the same familiar creak. The hallway is still narrow. The windows still catch the morning sun. But almost everything else has changed. The old gas stove is gone. The heavy percolator no longer bubbles on the counter. The cast iron skillet that cooked thousands of breakfasts now hangs on the wall as decoration. The clothesline in the backyard has disappeared, replaced by a wooden deck where children now play with toys their grandparents could never have imagined. The kitchen is brighter. Larger. Quieter. A dishwasher hums softly in the background. A coffee maker finishes brewing in less than a minute. The refrigerator is twice the size of the one that stood here 70 years ago. At first glance, it feels like a completely different world. And yet, if you stay for dinner, something begins to feel strangely familiar. A parent calls everyone to the table. Someone asks about school. Someone else talks about work. A child laughs so hard that milk nearly spills across the table. Everyone reaches for the bread at the same time. For a little while, the phones are forgotten. The conversation takes over. And suddenly, despite everything that has changed, the heart of the house feels exactly the same. Because homes were never really defined by their appliances. Or their wallpaper. Or the style of their cabinets. They were defined by the people inside them. The ordinary moments they shared. The meals they prepared. The kindness they offered one another after long days. That has never gone out of fashion. One day, decades from now, another generation may walk through houses built in our own time. They'll smile at the old smartphones tucked away in drawers. They'll laugh at bulky televisions that once seemed impossibly thin. They'll wonder how we lived before whatever remarkable technology comes next. And just as we've looked back with curiosity at this 1950s kitchen, they'll look back at ours. Not because of the machines. Because of the memories. They'll ask the same questions we've been asking throughout this journey. Who lived here? What made them laugh? What worried them? What ordinary routines filled their mornings? History has a wonderful way of reminding us that every generation feels modern while it's living its own story. Only later does everyday life become fascinating. Perhaps that's why we should treasure the ordinary moments while they're still ordinary. The family dinner. The quiet cup of coffee before sunrise. The familiar sound of footsteps in the hallway. The recipe that's been cooked so many times no one needs to read it anymore. Those moments feel small today. Tomorrow, they'll become priceless memories. As we gently step outside one final time, the evening sky stretches peacefully above the neighborhood. The porch light glows behind us. The front door closes softly. Inside, another family continues another ordinary evening. Outside, history quietly moves forward. It always has. It always will. Thank you for walking beside me through this remarkable journey into everyday life. Wherever you are tonight, I hope this story reminds you to notice the simple moments around you. Because one day, those ordinary moments may become the most extraordinary memories of all. Before we turn out the light and quietly leave this little house behind, I'd like you to do one last thing. Stand with me in the middle of the kitchen. Don't say anything. Just listen. The refrigerator hums softly in the corner. The wall clock ticks with steady confidence, measuring another ordinary evening. A window is cracked open just enough for the cool night air to drift inside. Somewhere beyond the backyard, a dog barks once. Then silence returns. This room has witnessed thousands of ordinary moments. Morning conversations over coffee. Children rushing to finish breakfast before school. Birthday cakes cooling on the counter. Holiday dinners that filled every chair around the table. Apologies spoken quietly after disagreements. Good news celebrated with hugs. Bad news carried together in silence. The kitchen never judged. It simply stood here, day after day, offering the same dependable space where life unfolded. If walls could remember, these walls would remember everything. They would remember tiny handprints reaching for cookies. They would remember a father coming home tired after work. They would remember a mother standing at the sink long after everyone else had gone to bed, finishing one last dish before tomorrow began. They would remember laughter echoing through open windows on warm summer evenings. And they would remember tears that nobody outside the house ever saw. Because that is what homes do. They quietly collect the stories of ordinary people. Not to keep them forever, but to pass them gently to the next generation. Perhaps someone living here today has no idea whose footsteps once crossed these wooden floors. They don't know the names. They don't know the birthdays. They don't know the dreams that filled these rooms 70 years ago. Yet they are adding their own story to the house every single day. One day, another family will do the same. The walls will listen. The windows will welcome another sunrise. The kitchen will fill with new voices. History doesn't stop. It simply changes families. And maybe that's the most comforting thought of all. Long after we're gone. Long after today's routines have become yesterday's memories. Someone will still wake before dawn. Someone will still put water on to boil. Someone will still gather the people they love around a table. The details will change. The heart never does. So, before we leave this neighborhood behind, take one last look around. Notice the worn floor beneath your feet. The smooth wooden table polished by decades of family meals. The curtains moving gently with the evening breeze. The soft glow of the porch light shining through the window. These aren't just objects. They're quiet witnesses to ordinary lives lived with patience, resilience, and love. And perhaps that's the greatest history lesson of all. The world is not only changed by presidents, inventors, or famous names. It is changed every single day by ordinary people who choose to care for one another. One breakfast. One conversation. One kind gesture. One ordinary day at a time. By now, the neighborhood is completely still. The porch lights have gone out. The curtains are drawn. The only light comes from the moon, resting softly on rooftops that have watched generations come and go. It's strange, isn't it? We've spent so much time inside this little suburban community that it almost feels like we know the people who lived here. Not because they were famous, but because they were familiar. We know the mother who measured coffee grounds before sunrise without needing a recipe. We know the father who backed the family car down the driveway at exactly the same time every weekday. We know the children who left muddy footprints across the kitchen floor only to race outside again 5 minutes later. We know the neighbor who waved from across the fence every afternoon. None of them expected to be remembered. Yet here we are. Decades later. Thinking about them. Wondering about them. Learning from them. Perhaps that tells us something important about history. The people who leave the deepest marks aren't always the ones who become famous. Sometimes they're simply the ones who quietly cared for the people around them. Imagine opening one of the kitchen drawers. Inside, you find a faded shopping list. Milk. Eggs. Flour. Butter. Soap. Nothing extraordinary. And yet, that little piece of paper captures an entire way of life. Every item represents another meal. Another chore. Another ordinary day lived with purpose. Or perhaps you open a family photo album. Black and white photographs smile back at you. Children sitting on front steps. Parents standing proudly beside a brand new car. Grandparents gathered around a holiday table. No one in those photographs knows the future. They don't know which moments will become treasured memories. They're simply living them. Just as we are today. That's the beautiful thing about ordinary life. We rarely recognize its importance until it has already become the past. One day, someone may look at photographs of our own kitchens. They may laugh at the gadgets we considered modern. They may wonder why our coffee machines looked so complicated. They may smile at the fashions, the furniture, the family traditions. But if they look closely enough, they'll discover something wonderfully familiar. People still caring for one another. People still sharing meals. People still making homes. The scenery changes. Human nature doesn't. As the first hint of dawn begins to brighten the eastern sky, our little neighborhood prepares for another day. A bird sings from the top of a maple tree. A newspaper lands softly on a front porch. Somewhere inside one of these quiet homes, an alarm clock is about to ring. Another ordinary morning is ready to begin. The routines we've followed throughout this journey will continue. Not because anyone demands them, but because love has always been built from small, repeated acts of care. And perhaps that's what we've really been exploring all along. Not simply the history of housework, but the history of devotion. The quiet promise, renewed every morning, that someone will wake up and do whatever needs to be done for the people they love. As we quietly step away from this little neighborhood, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Throughout this journey, we've spent hours exploring someone else's ordinary life. We've stood in a 1950s kitchen before dawn. We've walked beside a homemaker carrying heavy grocery bags home on foot. We've listened to the steady ticking of a wall clock while another load of laundry waited to be folded. We've watched children race through backyards that have long since changed. And somewhere along the way, those ordinary moments began to feel extraordinary. But here's the surprising part. The people living those moments never thought they were extraordinary. To them, it was simply Tuesday. Perhaps that's true of our own lives as well. Right now, somewhere in your home, there's an object you've stopped noticing. Maybe it's an old coffee mug you reach for every morning. Maybe it's a recipe card tucked into a drawer. Maybe it's the dining table where your family gathers at the end of the day. Or perhaps it's the quiet chair by the window where someone always sits with a book before bed. None of these things seem especially important today. But 50 years from now, they might tell an entire story. Imagine someone walking through your home decades from now. What would they notice? Would they wonder why there are family photos covering one wall? Would they smile at the old kitchen gadgets that once seemed so modern? Would they laugh at the style of your furniture, just as we smile at avocado green refrigerators and chrome toasters from the 1950s? Almost certainly. But more importantly, they'd wonder about the people. Who lived here? Who cooked in this kitchen? Who sat around this table every evening? Who celebrated birthdays in this living room? Who stayed awake through difficult nights comforting a frightened child? Those are the questions that truly matter. Because history has never really been about objects. It's about people. Objects simply help us remember them. The cast iron skillet reminds us of countless breakfasts. The worn cookbook reminds us of family recipes passed from one generation to the next. The faded armchair reminds us of evenings spent reading stories before bedtime. Every ordinary object quietly carries extraordinary memories. Perhaps that's why museums are filled with simple things. An old apron. A handwritten letter. A wooden spoon. A child's toy. By themselves, they're ordinary. Together, they tell the story of an entire life. As the sun rises one last time over our little suburban neighborhood, golden light spills across the rooftops exactly as it has for generations. Another family opens their curtains. Another kettle begins to whistle. Another breakfast is prepared. The story continues. Not because we're watching. Because life always moves forward. One ordinary morning at a time. So wherever you are listening tonight, whether you're relaxing in bed, driving home after a long day, folding laundry, or quietly enjoying your own cup of coffee, I hope you'll look around your home a little differently tomorrow. Notice the familiar sounds. The little routines. The objects you use without thinking. Because one day, they may become someone's window into the past. As dawn breaks over the neighborhood one last time, the streets look almost exactly as they did when we first arrived. The sidewalks are still damp with morning dew. The birds still greet the sunrise before anyone else is awake. A faint breeze stirs the curtains behind a kitchen window. Somewhere inside, someone reaches for the coffee pot without even thinking. After all this time, it becomes clear that this story was never really about one house. It wasn't even about one family. It was about something much larger. It was about the quiet rhythm that has connected generations for centuries. Think about it. Long before electricity reached these streets, families gathered around morning meals. Long after smart homes and voice assistants became common, families still gathered around dinner tables. The furniture changed. The technology changed. The world outside changed beyond recognition. But the simple act of caring for one another never disappeared. That quiet thread runs through every generation. It connects grandparents to grandchildren. Parents to children. Neighbors to neighbors. It stretches across decades without making a sound. We've spent hours talking about laundry baskets, grocery lists, polished shoes, simmering soup, and freshly ironed shirts. On their own, they seem like ordinary chores. Together, they reveal something extraordinary. They reveal that love often looks remarkably practical. Sometimes love is waking before sunrise so someone else can sleep a little longer. Sometimes it's repairing a favorite coat instead of replacing it. Sometimes it's remembering exactly how someone likes their morning coffee. Sometimes it's simply making sure there's enough food on the table for everyone. Those acts rarely receive applause. Yet they shape lives more deeply than we often realize. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about history is the belief that it belongs only to remarkable people. It doesn't. History belongs to everyone. It belongs to the child learning to ride a bicycle. The parent waiting outside a school. The grandparent passing down an old family recipe. The neighbor waving from across the fence. These ordinary moments become the fabric of an era. Years later, they're what people remember. As we stand quietly at the end of this peaceful street, the neighborhood begins another ordinary day. A screen door opens. A newspaper is picked up from the porch. A dog eagerly pulls its owner down the sidewalk. The smell of breakfast drifts through an open window. Life moves forward exactly as it always has. Without asking for attention. Without realizing it's becoming history. Perhaps that's the most beautiful lesson of all. The moments you're living today don't have to be extraordinary to matter. You don't need a famous name to leave a meaningful legacy. Sometimes the greatest legacy is simply creating a place where people feel safe, welcomed, and loved. A place they'll remember long after the furniture has been replaced and the walls have been repainted. Because homes aren't remembered for perfect decorations. They're remembered for the people who filled them with warmth. And that kind of history can never grow old. So as the morning sun climbs higher above the rooftops, we quietly tip our hats to the countless ordinary people whose names we'll never know. Their stories may never appear in textbooks. But they live on in every family they cared for, every tradition they passed down, and every ordinary day they lived with quiet dedication. Well, the neighborhood has gone quiet. The kitchen has been cleaned. The last dish has dried on the rack. The porch light has been switched off. And the little house we've called home for the past several hours has finally gone to sleep. When we first arrived, it was just another address on a quiet suburban street. A modest house with a small backyard, a narrow kitchen, and a routine that seemed almost invisible. But after spending time here, it became something much more. It became a reminder that history isn't only found in famous places. Sometimes it's found in a grocery list folded into an apron pocket. Sometimes it's hidden inside a stained cookbook that's been opened thousands of times. Sometimes it's waiting in the sound of a percolator bubbling before sunrise while the rest of the neighborhood is still asleep. Those small moments rarely appear in history books. Yet they're the moments that shaped generations. The children who grew up in these homes carried those lessons with them. They learned responsibility by watching it. They learned kindness by receiving it. They learned perseverance without anyone ever calling it that. It was simply part of everyday life. And perhaps that's the greatest gift ordinary people leave behind. Not monuments. Not headlines. But examples. Examples that quietly continue long after they're gone. As we close this chapter together, I hope this journey has done more than simply tell the story of one American neighborhood. I hope it's reminded you that every generation believes its ordinary life will be forgotten. Yet somehow, it never is. Someone always remembers the smell of breakfast before school. Someone always remembers the sound of a parent's footsteps in the hallway. Someone always remembers the chair where a grandparent liked to sit every evening. Those memories become family history. And family history becomes part of the larger story of humanity. So tomorrow morning, when you make your coffee, when you prepare breakfast, when you straighten the kitchen, fold a blanket, or sit down for dinner with the people you love, remember this little house. Remember that ordinary moments have always mattered. They mattered in 1953. They matter today. And they'll matter long after all of us are gone. Because history isn't only written by extraordinary events. It's quietly written every single day by ordinary people choosing to care for one another. And perhaps, after all these hours together, that's the one lesson worth carrying home. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the forgotten rhythms of everyday life. If you enjoyed spending this quiet evening exploring history together, I'd love to have you back for another story soon. Until then, wherever you are in the world, I hope tonight brings you peace. Before we part ways, I'd like to leave you with one last image. The year is still 1953. The neighborhood has settled into silence. Every porch light has gone dark. The last train in the distance has already passed. A gentle breeze moves through the maple trees, carrying with it the scent of freshly cut grass and cool evening air. Inside the little house we've come to know so well, everyone is asleep. The children dream peacefully upstairs. The father's work shoes are neatly placed beside the bedroom door, ready for another early morning. Downstairs, the kitchen is exactly as it was left. The dishes are clean. The countertops have been wiped. The table stands quietly beneath a single hanging light that's now been switched off. The percolator waits patiently on the stove. Tomorrow morning, before the sun rises, someone will fill it with water once again. The cycle will begin again. Not because history demands it, but because life does. That simple truth has carried humanity through every generation. Empires have risen and fallen. Technology has transformed the world. Cities have grown larger than anyone living in this neighborhood could ever imagine. We've reached the end. Not just the end of this street. Not just the end of this neighborhood. But the end of a journey that began before sunrise on a quiet morning in the early 1950s. When we first stepped through the front door of this modest suburban home, it looked like thousands of others built across America after the war. A small kitchen. A simple dining table. A backyard where children played beneath a clothesline. Nothing about it seemed extraordinary. And yet, over the course of this journey, it revealed something extraordinary after all. It reminded us that history doesn't only happen in places that appear in textbooks. History happens wherever ordinary people choose to build a life together. It happens when someone wakes before dawn to prepare breakfast. When a parent stays up late sewing a loose button back onto a school shirt. When neighbors stop to talk over a backyard fence. When families gather around a table, not because the meal is perfect, but because being together matters more. These moments are so common that they're almost invisible while we're living them. Only later do we understand how precious they were. Perhaps that's why old photographs feel so powerful. We don't just see the faces. We remember the voices. The laughter. The routines. The hopes that filled those ordinary days. Every generation believes the future will remember the great events. Wars. Elections. Scientific discoveries. And of course, it does. But what truly gives those events meaning are the millions of ordinary lives unfolding quietly in the background. The people raising children. Preparing meals. Helping neighbors. Keeping communities alive one ordinary day at a time. Without them, history would have no foundation. As we leave this little house behind, one final image stays with us. The kitchen window. Morning sunlight shining through the glass. A fresh pot of coffee beginning to brew. A new day quietly waiting to begin. No audience. No applause. Just another ordinary morning. And somehow, that's enough. Because ordinary mornings become extraordinary years. Extraordinary years become family memories. And family memories become history. So tomorrow, when your own morning begins, perhaps you'll notice something you hadn't before. The familiar sound of your home waking up. The comforting routine you've repeated so many times you've stopped thinking about it. The people who quietly make your days a little easier. The small acts of care that ask for nothing in return. Those are the moments worth holding on to. Those are the moments that last. If this story has taught us anything, it's that endings are rarely true endings. They're simply places where one story quietly hands the page to another. So, imagine this. The morning after we've said our goodbyes. The sun rises over the same little neighborhood. The sidewalks glisten with dew. A robin lands on a white picket fence. The milkman makes his final stop before heading to the next street. Inside the house, the familiar routine begins again. The alarm isn't needed. It never really was. Habit has become more reliable than any clock. A pair of slippers finds the wooden floor. The kitchen light flickers on. A match strikes. The blue flame appears beneath the stove. And within minutes, the gentle bubbling of the percolator fills the room once more. Life doesn't pause simply because we've stopped watching. It continues. It always has. The children hurry downstairs, rubbing sleep from their eyes. A schoolbook is forgotten on the dining table. Someone laughs. Someone complains about eating oatmeal again. Someone searches the house for a missing shoe that's been sitting in plain sight all along. The father folds his newspaper neatly before leaving for work. The front door opens. Then closes. A car disappears down the street. The sound fades into the distance. And once again, the neighborhood settles into its familiar rhythm. What once seemed repetitive now feels comforting. Because repetition is often another word for stability. For children, these routines become the quiet promise that tomorrow will begin much like today. Breakfast will be waiting. Someone will remind them to wear a coat. Someone will kiss them goodbye before school. They won't think twice about these moments. Children rarely do. Only years later, after they've grown up and built homes of their own, will they realize how extraordinary those ordinary mornings truly were. Maybe that's why memories have such a gentle way of returning. A familiar smell. The sound of coffee brewing. The squeak of an old screen door. Without warning, we're transported back to places we thought we'd forgotten. Not because the places were perfect, but because they were home. And perhaps that's the quiet gift this little neighborhood leaves with us. A reminder that home is not measured in square feet. It's measured in moments. Moments of patience. Moments of laughter. Moments of quiet sacrifice that no visitor ever notices. The kind of moments that disappear almost as soon as they happen, yet somehow remain with us forever. As the morning grows brighter and another ordinary day begins, we step away from the front porch for the last time. Behind us, life carries on exactly as it should. Ahead of us waits another forgotten story, another quiet corner of history waiting to be discovered. Every house has one. Every family has one. Every ordinary life contains chapters worthy of being remembered. As our journey finally comes to an end, there's one last thought worth carrying with us. No one ever wakes up and says, "Today will become history." People simply wake up. They make coffee. They tie their shoes. They kiss their children goodbye. They hurry through another busy morning, believing tomorrow will look much the same. The families who lived in this neighborhood believed that too. When they carried groceries home from the market. When they painted the fence on a warm Saturday afternoon. When they gathered around the television to watch the evening news. They weren't trying to preserve a moment for future generations. They were simply living it. And yet here we are, more than 70 years later, looking back at those very moments with admiration and curiosity. That realization changes the way we see our own lives. Because if yesterday's ordinary routine became today's history, then today's ordinary routine will someday become someone else's history too. Perhaps one day, a grandchild will discover an old family recipe tucked inside a cookbook. Perhaps they'll find photographs stored in a dusty box in the attic. Perhaps they'll hear stories that begin with, "Your grandmother always made pancakes on Sunday mornings." Or, "Your grandfather never missed an evening walk after dinner." Those stories won't survive because they were dramatic. They'll survive because they were repeated with love. That may be the quiet secret behind every meaningful life. Greatness isn't always found in extraordinary achievements. Sometimes it's found in extraordinary consistency. Showing up. Caring. Keeping promises. Preparing another meal. Listening when someone needs to talk. Doing the small things well, day after day. The world rarely applauds those moments. But families remember them forever. As we take one final walk down this peaceful suburban street, the evening sun casts long golden shadows across the sidewalks. A bicycle leans against a garage. A sprinkler quietly waters the front lawn. Somewhere, laughter drifts through an open window. The scene feels wonderfully ordinary. Exactly as it should. Because ordinary life has always been the place where history quietly grows. Not all at once. One sunrise. One conversation. One family dinner. One bedtime story. One ordinary day at a time. And maybe that's why this little house has stayed with us for so long. It reminded us that behind every famous decade are millions of quiet lives that kept the world moving forward. Lives built not on recognition, but on responsibility. Not on applause, but on love. And so, we've reached the very last page. Not just of this story, but of a journey that has carried us through countless ordinary mornings, quiet afternoons, and peaceful evenings inside one small suburban home. When we began, we set out to answer a simple question. What did everyday life really look like for a suburban housewife in mid-century America? Along the way, we discovered something much larger. We discovered that history isn't made only by the people whose names fill textbooks. It's also made by the people whose names are remembered only around family tables. The mothers who woke before dawn so breakfast would be ready before anyone else stirred. The fathers who left for work carrying lunchboxes packed with quiet care. The children who unknowingly turned ordinary afternoons into lifelong memories. The neighbors who borrowed sugar, shared advice over backyard fences, and looked out for one another without expecting anything in return. Together, they built something far more lasting than they could ever have imagined. They built communities. They built traditions. They built homes. And homes, perhaps more than anything else, are where history truly lives. Not inside the walls, but inside the moments those walls protected. The birthday candles. The holiday dinners. The difficult conversations. The laughter echoing down hallways. The comforting routines that made every tomorrow feel a little more certain than today. Those moments don't disappear. They simply become memories. Then stories. Then history. As we've wandered through this neighborhood together, we've looked closely at things that are often overlooked. A percolator patiently bubbling before sunrise. A handwritten shopping list tucked into an apron pocket. Fresh sheets drying on a clothesline. A cast-iron skillet that had prepared thousands of breakfasts. A pair of worn slippers waiting faithfully beside the bed. Individually, they seemed ordinary. Together, they revealed an entire way of life. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson history offers us. Nothing meaningful is ever truly ordinary. Not when it's repeated with care. Not when it's done for the people we love. Not when it quietly shapes another human being's life. Tonight, as the neighborhood settles beneath another peaceful sky, every house grows still. Curtains are drawn. Kitchen lights fade one by one. The streets become silent except for the soft rustle of leaves moving through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoes across the night. Tomorrow morning, another family will wake. Another breakfast will be prepared. Another ordinary day will quietly begin. History never really ends. It simply changes hands. And now, this story belongs to you. Carry it with you the next time you hear coffee brewing before sunrise. The next time you gather around a dinner table. The next time you notice the quiet routines that make a house feel like home. Because those moments matter. They always have. They always will. Long after the dishes were washed. Long after the children had grown up. Long after the old Chevrolet stopped pulling into the driveway every evening. The little house remained. It stood through changing seasons. It watched spring flowers bloom beside the front steps year after year. It listened as summer thunderstorms rolled across the neighborhood. It felt autumn leaves gather in its gutters. It endured winters that covered its roof with quiet blankets of snow. The house was never in a hurry. People came and went. Time kept moving. But the house stayed where it had always been. If it could speak, it would tell thousands of small stories. It would remember the excitement of moving day, when every room echoed because there wasn't much furniture yet. It would remember the nervous laughter of two young parents wondering if they could really build a future here. It would remember babies taking their very first steps across the living room floor. It would remember scraped knees, birthday parties, holiday dinners, late-night conversations, and peaceful Sunday afternoons. None of those moments seemed historic while they were happening. But together, they became an entire lifetime. Years passed. The children grew into adults. One by one, their bedrooms became quieter. The toys disappeared. The schoolbooks were packed away. The walls that once held colorful drawings eventually displayed graduation photographs instead. Then came weddings. Then grandchildren. The little house welcomed them all. Each generation brought new voices, new laughter, and new memories. Yet somehow, the spirit of the home never changed. Because a real home isn't built once. It's rebuilt every day through ordinary acts of love. A warm meal. A patient conversation. A comforting hug after a difficult day. A familiar face waiting by the window. Those moments quietly strengthen a home far more than bricks or timber ever could. Today, if you walked through neighborhoods like this across America, many of these houses would still be standing. Some have larger kitchens now. Some have renovated living rooms. Some wear fresh paint in colors that never existed in the 1950s. But beneath those changes lies the same simple purpose. To shelter families. To protect memories. To witness ordinary lives unfolding one day at a time. Perhaps that's why old neighborhoods feel comforting. Even when we don't know the people who live there, we recognize the rhythm. Morning begins. Children laugh. Neighbors wave. Dinner is served. Lights go out. Morning comes again. Generation after generation, the pattern continues. As our own journey finally reaches its quiet conclusion, I hope you'll remember that history is never only about the extraordinary. It's about the countless ordinary people who quietly built the world we inherited. They rarely asked for recognition. Most never received it. Yet their work echoes through every comfortable home, every family tradition, and every neighborhood that still feels like a community today. So the next time you pass an old house, pause for just a moment. Someone laughed there. Someone cried there. Someone dreamed there. Someone loved there. And although their names may be forgotten, their ordinary lives helped shape the world we now call home. Before we finally close this book, let's take one last walk down the street. The sidewalks are quieter now than when we first arrived. The maple trees are taller. The houses have weathered decades of rain, snow, and sunshine. Children who once chased one another across these front lawns have long since become grandparents themselves. Many of them no longer remember the exact layout of the kitchen. They may have forgotten the color of the curtains or where the flour tin sat on the shelf. But they remember something far more important. They remember how the house felt. They remember coming home after school and smelling dinner already cooking. They remember hearing laughter drifting from the kitchen while homework waited on the dining room table. They remember falling asleep while distant voices downstairs slowly faded into silence. Memory has an interesting way of working. It doesn't always preserve the details. It preserves the feelings. The feeling of being safe. The feeling of belonging. The feeling that no matter how difficult the world outside became, there was always a place waiting where someone cared whether you came home. Perhaps that's why people spend their entire lives searching for a place that feels like home. Not because of the building itself. Because of the love that once lived inside it. As we've explored this neighborhood together, we've talked about schedules, grocery trips, laundry, breakfasts, school mornings, and endless household chores. At first, they sounded exhausting. And they were. The work was demanding. The hours were long. Recognition was rare. Yet behind every task was something much larger. Hope. Hope that children would grow up healthy. Hope that tomorrow would be a little easier than today. Hope that all these small sacrifices would quietly build a better future. Looking back now, we know they did. The children raised in neighborhoods like this became teachers, nurses, engineers, artists, mechanics, scientists, parents, and grandparents. Many carried with them lessons they never realized they had learned. How to care for others. How to keep promises. How to show up, even when no one was watching. Those lessons weren't taught in classrooms. They were lived every single day inside ordinary homes. That may be the greatest inheritance any family can pass along. Not money. Not possessions. But character. As evening settles one final time across our little neighborhood, porch lights begin to glow softly in the gathering darkness. A curtain moves gently in an upstairs window. A distant radio plays somewhere down the street. The smell of dinner lingers faintly in the cool evening air. Everything feels wonderfully ordinary. Exactly as it should. Because ordinary life has always been where the greatest stories quietly begin. Not with fanfare. Not with headlines. But with a family sitting together around a table, sharing another meal before tomorrow arrives. As we quietly turn the corner and allow the neighborhood to disappear behind us, we carry something valuable with us. A renewed appreciation for the unnoticed. For the routines we often rush through. For the people whose quiet efforts make our own lives possible. By now, the sun has set beyond the rooftops for what feels like the last time. The neighborhood is wrapped in the quiet comfort of another ordinary evening. The dishes have been dried. The windows have been locked. The curtains have been drawn. A single porch light remains glowing at the end of the street, welcoming anyone who's still making their way home. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, then you've done something rather unusual. You've slowed down. For a little while, you've stepped away from the rush of modern life and entered a world where time moved at the pace of a bubbling percolator, a handwritten grocery list, and a family gathered around a dinner table. At first, it may have seemed like we were simply exploring the daily routine of a suburban housewife. But somewhere along the way, the story quietly changed. It became a story about people. About the invisible work that keeps families together. About routines so familiar that they're often overlooked. About the quiet courage required to do the same demanding tasks day after day without applause, recognition, or certainty that anyone truly noticed. And perhaps that's why this story still resonates after all these years. Because every generation has its own version of invisible work. Every family depends on someone who quietly carries responsibilities that rarely appear in photographs. Someone remembers birthdays. Someone prepares meals. Someone notices when another person is struggling. Someone stays awake a little longer to make tomorrow easier for everyone else. The faces change. The decades change. But those acts of quiet care remain remarkably constant. History often celebrates extraordinary moments. The moon landing. Great discoveries. Historic speeches. Those achievements deserve to be remembered. But history also belongs to the millions of ordinary people who quietly made breakfast while the world was changing outside their windows. Without them, there would have been no foundation for any of those great moments. As we stand at the edge of this neighborhood one final time, the houses behind us fade gently into the evening light. Some have welcomed the same family for generations. Others have seen many different names written on the mailbox. Each one carries stories we'll never fully know. Stories of first days and last days. Of celebrations and heartbreaks. Of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. Stories that mattered deeply to the people who lived them, even if the rest of the world never noticed. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps a meaningful life was never meant to be measured by fame. Perhaps it's measured by the people who felt safe because you were there. The people who smiled because of your kindness. The people who remembered your ordinary acts of love long after you were gone. If that's true, then this little neighborhood was filled with extraordinary people after all. Not because they were famous, but because they quietly gave pieces of themselves to the people they loved every single day. As the final porch light softly switches off and the street settles into complete silence, our journey reaches its gentle conclusion. Tomorrow morning, somewhere, another ordinary story will begin. Another family will gather around breakfast. Another parent will hurry through a busy morning. Another child will laugh without realizing they're creating a memory that may last a lifetime. And history will quietly continue. One ordinary day at a time. As we prepare to leave this story behind forever, there's one final legacy worth talking about. Not the houses. Not the streets. Not even the neighborhood itself. The legacy of ordinary people. History has always been filled with names we've never heard. Millions of them. People who never stood in front of cameras. People who never wrote famous books. People who never imagined that their everyday choices would ripple far beyond their own lifetimes. And yet they did. Every carefully packed school lunch helped a child concentrate in class. Every repaired shirt stretched a family's budget just a little further. Every bedtime story built a young imagination. Every encouraging word gave someone the confidence to keep going. Those moments didn't change the world overnight. They changed people. And people changed the world. That's how history has always worked. Slowly. Quietly. One family at a time. One generation at a time. Walk once more through this little neighborhood. The houses sit peacefully beneath the stars. Most of the windows are dark now. A few still glow softly with warm yellow light. Inside one home, someone is finishing tomorrow's lunch. Inside another, a teenager is reading beneath a bedside lamp. In another, grandparents are looking through old family photographs, smiling at faces that seem both distant and familiar. Every house contains a different story. Yet all of them share something in common. Love expressed through ordinary routines. The world often encourages us to chase remarkable moments. To accomplish more. To move faster. To leave a bigger mark. But perhaps we've been looking in the wrong place all along. Perhaps the greatest mark we leave isn't measured by how many people know our names. Perhaps it's measured by how deeply we improve the lives of the people who know us best. The child who remembers always feeling safe. The friend who never forgot our kindness. The neighbor who appreciated a helping hand. The family that quietly became stronger because we were there. Those legacies rarely appear in history books. Yet they endure longer than many famous achievements. As dawn begins to brighten the horizon once again, another day quietly arrives. The neighborhood wakes exactly as it always has. Coffee brews. Doors open. Newspapers are collected. Children prepare for school. Life continues. Not because anyone is watching. Because that's what life has always done. And perhaps that's the greatest comfort history can offer. The ordinary world keeps turning. Families keep loving one another. Hope quietly survives from one generation to the next. No matter how much the world changes, those simple truths remain. So as we finally step beyond the edge of this peaceful little community, we leave with something far more valuable than facts or dates. We leave with perspective. A reminder that today's unnoticed moments may become tomorrow's cherished memories. A reminder that kindness is never wasted. A reminder that ordinary lives are never ordinary to the people who share them. Well, the house is quiet now. The kitchen is dark. The last cup has been washed and placed back in the cupboard. The chairs have been pushed beneath the table. Outside, the street is empty except for the soft glow of a single street lamp watching over the neighborhood until morning. When we first arrived here, all we wanted to understand was what life looked like inside an ordinary American suburban home during the middle of the 20th century. We thought we were going to learn about chores, about schedules, about shopping trips, laundry, and long days that seemed to repeat themselves without end. And we did. But somewhere along the way, the story quietly became something else. It became a story about resilience. About responsibility. About people who rarely received recognition, yet shaped the lives of everyone around them. History often remembers the loudest voices. The greatest victories. The biggest inventions. The moments that changed the world overnight. But there is another kind of history. The quiet kind. The history written before sunrise while coffee brewed on the stove. The history written by hands that folded clothes, prepared meals, mended torn sleeves, and comforted frightened children after bad dreams. No monuments were built for those moments. No headlines announced them. Yet without them, every generation that followed would have stood on much weaker ground. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson this little neighborhood has given us. A meaningful life isn't always measured by extraordinary accomplishments. Sometimes it's measured by ordinary faithfulness. By showing up every morning. By keeping promises. By caring for people who depend on you. By doing difficult things with kindness, even when no one is watching. Those are the quiet victories that history rarely records but families never forget. As we take one last look down this peaceful suburban street, the houses seem almost unchanged. Morning will come. Someone will wake before dawn. A kettle will whistle. A child will search for a missing shoe. Someone will wave to a neighbor across the fence. Life will begin again, just as it always has. Not because history is repeating itself. Because love has always looked remarkably ordinary. It lives in breakfast before school. In clean sheets after a long day. In conversations around a dinner table. In the simple decision to care for another person, day after day, year after year. Those moments may seem small while we're living them. One day, they'll become the stories future generations wish they could experience just one more time. So wherever you are tonight, before you drift off to sleep, perhaps think about the ordinary moments waiting for you tomorrow. The first cup of coffee. The familiar faces you'll see. The routines you've repeated so many times they've become invisible. Don't rush past them. They're the building blocks of a life. Before we leave this little neighborhood behind forever, I'd like to offer one final thought. Throughout this journey, we've explored a world that, on the surface, seemed remarkably ordinary. A modest home. A simple kitchen. A family following the same routines day after day. Yet those routines revealed something timeless. They reminded us that history is not only built by extraordinary events. It is built by ordinary people who quietly choose responsibility over convenience, patience over recognition, and love over applause. The suburban housewife of the 1950s was expected to keep an entire household running with little acknowledgement and few modern conveniences. Whether that system was fair is a question history continues to debate. But there is no debate about the amount of work it required. It demanded endurance, organization, skill, and an astonishing amount of invisible labor. As we've walked through this home together, we've seen more than chores. We've seen determination. We've seen sacrifice. We've seen the countless small decisions that transformed an ordinary house into a home. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson we can carry into our own lives. To notice the people whose work often goes unseen. To appreciate the routines that quietly hold families together. And to remember that even the smallest acts of care can leave a legacy that lasts for generations. Thank you for spending this time with me. Your curiosity has helped bring one small corner of everyday history back to life. Until our next journey into the past, may you find beauty in ordinary days, gratitude in familiar routines, and peace in the place you call home. Good night.